Hi, I'm Derek Downey, and welcome to Tarot and Human Development, where I'm exploring self-development in the Western mystery tradition. In this video, I'll be reading my newest article, Taurus in Tarot Cards, Learning to Finish What You've Started. About halfway or so through this video, I'll be getting to my own personal interpretations of the 5 tarot cards associated with Taurus, so if you'd prefer to just skip to that, I will have the timestamps to those in the description. Last, if you're interested in downloading my free one-page guide to all 78 tarot cards, I'll also have a link to that in the description. Without further ado, let's get started. So I start the article with a note here that says, instead of using the Smith-Waite suit name of Pentacles, in this article I use the more abbreviated Harris-Crowley suit name of Discs. In other words, the suit of Pentacles and the suit of Discs are just 2 names for the same suit. So anything I say about discs in this article is also relevant to Pentacles. According to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the following tarot cards represent Taurus: the Hierophant, the King of Discs, the 5 of Discs, which is Mercury in Taurus, the 6 of Discs, which is the Moon in Taurus, and the 7 of Discs, which is Saturn in Taurus. In this article, I'm going to give some traditional ideas about Taurus, then 3 new ideas I personally associate with Taurus, and last I will give my own interpretations of each tarot card. So let's get started with some traditional ideas about Taurus. In her book, The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Need, Joanna Martine Woolfolk describes Taurus as quiet, affectionate, patient, stable, determined and practical, stubborn, and resistant to change. In his 5th lecture on astrotheology, Manly P. Hall describes Taurus the bull as representing the virtue of dedication and perseverance, and the vice of stubbornness and the fear of change. He said that oftentimes, when we believe we are being loyal, we are actually being bull-headed, which Merriam-Webster defines as stupidly stubborn. As long as we remain bull-headed, we will be like the literally bull-headed Minotaur of ancient Greek mythology. The Minotaur is the half man, half bull. It's actually a man's body and a bull head. So we will be like this Minotaur, unhappily trapped in the confusing labyrinth of our ever-changing world. So as long as we remain bullheaded and we don't change, we're going to be stuck in a world that's constantly changing, so we're going to be unhappy. We have to change with the world that changes around us. However, when this principle of determination is applied toward the pursuit of our purpose instead of maintaining our prejudices, we become as powerful and unstoppable as, and this is a quote by Manly Hall, the plodding ox that draws the plow through the ancient muddy waters of the Nile bank. I like to think of this idea as it might be hard to get a bull moving at first, but once it is moving, you better stay out of its way. Teaching from an esoteric astrology perspective, William Meter said in his blog and lecture at the Theosophical Society that the lower personality nature of Taurus, with its traditional ruler of Venus, represents not only groundedness and dependability, but also desire itself. In traditional astrology, the fixed earth sign of Taurus tends to get associated with materialism and what I call the desire to acquire, or you could maybe call it the desire to acquire more. Whether that is more money, more material objects, or more comfort and pleasure. However, Venus's desire to acquire is just a byproduct stemming out of its deeper, more fundamental drive and mission in life, which is to appreciate beauty. So basically, we want these things. We want to acquire these things. But really what is at the core of it is we want to be able to appreciate the beauty of these things. And we want to be able to appreciate pleasure, to appreciate beautiful objects, things like that. So even though it is materialism on the surface, it is actually our drive and our hunger, our thirst for beauty itself that is the deeper cause of our desire to acquire. Thus, the higher soul nature of Taurus, with its higher ruler of Vulcan, who is the blacksmith of the gods, the higher soul nature of Taurus becomes dedicated to not only the appreciation of more beauty in the physical realm, but also the creation of more beauty in the physical realm, which I call the duty to beauty. At this point, Meter makes sure to emphasize that when the Taurian artist creates a beautiful work of art, they're not actually creating the beauty. Instead, they are revealing the beauty that pre-existed the work of art. Thus, the sign of Taurus is said to be a sign of revelation because it is revealing beauty in things. It's not creating beauty really, it's just revealing the beauty that pre-exists the work. Now that I've touched on some traditional ideas, let's move on to the new concepts. Concept number 1. Quantity leads to quality. Whereas Aries is all about having the courage, strength, willpower, and excitement to start something brand new, Taurus is all about having the perseverance, dedication, commitment, and resilience to see the new things through to their completion. Without Aries, we would never start anything new. But without Taurus, we would never see anything through. Taurus is not about new beginnings. Taurus is about finishing what you've started. Although I can only speak for myself, from my perspective, starting things is easy and finishing things is incredibly hard. Concept number 1 is about the idea that if you want to get better at the skill of finishing things, then just like any other skill, you need tons of practice finishing things. The more things you finish and see through to their completion, the better you will get at finishing and seeing things through to their completion. On his website, James Clear retells the story originally told by authors David Bales and Ted Orland in their book Art and Fear. The story goes like this. A photography teacher divided his class into 2 groups. The first group was told they would be graded on the quantity of photos produced. 100 plus photos would be an A. 90 photos would be a B. 80 photos would be a C, and so on. Meanwhile, the second group in the class would be graded on the quality of a single photo submitted at the end of the semester. These students only needed to submit 1 photo, but in order to get an A, it had to be an essentially perfect photo. James Clear summarizes the results as follows. At the end of the term, he was surprised to find, he being the professor, he was surprised to find that all the best photos were produced by the quantity group. During the semester, these students were busy taking photos, experimenting with composition and lighting, testing out various methods in the darkroom, and learning from their mistakes. In the process of creating hundreds of photos, they honed their skills. Meanwhile, the quality group sat around speculating about perfection. In the end, they had little to show for their efforts other than unverified theories and 1 mediocre photo. In other words, while the quality group was more focused on finishing perfect work, the quantity group was more focused on finishing work. They did not care whether the work was good or bad, they only cared whether the work was finished or not. By practicing the skill of finishing work, the work they finished became better and better. The big takeaway here is that if you are trying to develop a new skill, it is more important to create a large quantity of work than it is to create high-quality work, because creating a large quantity of work will eventually lead to creating high-quality work. To say this another, more crude way, using the quote that my Uncle John used to say to me all the time about songwriting, if you throw enough shit against the wall, some of it will stick. Iconic author Ray Bradbury emphasizes the same point in his essay, Zen in the Art of Writing. Here's a passage from that. For I believe that eventually quantity will make for quality. How so? Michelangelo's, Da Vinci's, Tintoretto's billion sketches, the quantitative, prepared them for the qualitative, single sketches further down the line, single portraits, single landscapes of incredible control and beauty. A great surgeon dissects and redissects 1,000, 10,000 bodies, tissues, organs, preparing thus by quantity the time when quality will count, with a living creature under his knife. An athlete may run 10,000 miles in order to prepare for 100 yards. Quantity gives experience. From experience alone can quality come. The point is not to create good work. The point is to create work regularly enough so that when you experience that fleeting, brief moment of divine inspiration or creative genius, you have both the skills and the space in your schedule to harness that idea and see it through to completion. This brings me to concept number 2. Perfection leads to a scarcity mindset. As mentioned earlier, Taurus has the traditional ruler of Venus, whose Greek equivalent is Aphrodite. Both Venus and Aphrodite represent beauty, love, and attraction, among other things. It is said to be this rulership that gives Taurus its fundamental drive to appreciate the beautiful things of the physical world, whether it is nice furniture, a great meal, a cool car, or whatever. Humans are born with an innate ability to appreciate beautiful things. However, just as a child is born into the world dependent upon the adults around them, we enter this world dependent upon our environment to provide us with these beautiful things. In order to grow into adults, we must take on the responsibility to not only actively and consciously appreciate beauty, but to help create or reveal more beauty in the world, both for ourselves and for others. I call this, like I mentioned earlier, our duty to beauty. There's just one problem. When we first set out to create beauty in the world, we're pretty much guaranteed to absolutely suck at it. You can see my article or my video on Aries for a more detailed elaboration on this. This presents us with the incredibly frustrating and discouraging situation where we want to create beauty, but we keep creating ugly. Ira Glass, creator and host of This American Life, describes this situation as follows. And he says, all of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's this gap that for the first couple of years you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good. It's trying to be good, it has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer. And your taste is good enough to know that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. The thing I would say to you is everybody goes through that. You've got to know it's totally normal, and the most important possible thing you could do is do a lot of work. Do a huge volume of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week or every month, you know you're going to finish one story. Because it's only by actually going through a volume of work that you're actually going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions. Here we can see a kind of unexpected antagonist. If someone has a keen sense for what is beautiful, that sense can actually work against us when we first attempt to create beautiful things ourselves. Since we believe our work is not beautiful or high quality enough, we don't release it, which means we aren't finishing it. Thus, we must not let our own sense of good taste discourage us. We must internalize the mantra that bad work released is a success. For I personally believe that a work cannot be truly finished until it is released to the world. And this corresponds to what Seth Godin says, which is, we must ship the work. Above all else, we must ship the work. That's the most important thing we can do. As an artist myself, I've experienced the psychological tar pit that results from having a work of art that you think has the potential to be amazing. So you spend hours, days, months, years sitting on it and never finishing it because you can't quite get the physical form to match the imaginary form in your head. I believe that when you think like this, you are operating out of a fear-based scarcity mindset instead of a love-based abundance mindset. Perpetually working on the same work of art and never releasing it is essentially saying, I've found something so very beautiful in my mind's eye, and if I screw this up and physically manifest it in a way that does not truly capture the beauty in my mind, I'm scared that I may never get another chance to create something so beautiful ever again. Instead of this scarcity mindset, we must have an abundance mindset toward beauty. Years ago, I heard Tim Ferriss say that he approaches life with the mindset of, I can always create more opportunity. I would say we must approach our work with the mindset of, I can always create more beauty. By this I mean, you must finish what you are currently working on, doing the best job the current you can do, then release it and move on, so you can create new, better, and more beautiful things. Working on the same work of art forever is like walking through a room full of treasure, clutching the coins in your pocket. Until you let go of the coins in your hand, you will not be able to pick up the diamonds and the rubies and the sapphires all around you. I'll wrap up this concept with something James Clear wrote in one of his recent 321 newsletters. And here's the quote. Finish something, anything. Stop researching, planning, and preparing to do the work, and just do the work. It doesn't matter how good or how bad it is. You don't need to set the world on fire with your first try. You just need to prove to yourself that you have what it takes to produce something. There are no artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, or scientists who became great by half finishing their work. Stop debating what you should make and just make something. Concept number 3. Union with the laws of nature. In the book The True and Invisible Rosicrucian Order, Paul Foster Case wrote that, in the tomb of the legendary Christian Rosencreuz, there is a brass plate with the 4 figures of the fixed zodiac signs: Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. Each sign had a corresponding motto engraved with it. Taurus's motto was Legis Jugum, which is Latin for the yoke of the law. A yoke is defined by Merriam-Webster as a wooden bar or frame by which 2 draft animals, such as oxen, are joined at the heads or necks for working together. It is interesting to note here that the neck, where a yoke is attached, is the body part traditionally associated with Taurus. According to Wikipedia, it is believed that the word yoke and the word yoga both come from the same ancient Sanskrit root, which means to unite. Thus, anytime the idea of a yoke is brought up, it seems to imply a sort of cooperation that allows two or more life forms to work together as one. For example, Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And that is the book of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 29 and 30. This could essentially be interpreted as, my teachings are not that hard to follow, and once you follow them, you'll feel better. Paul Foster Case wrote that, on its surface, the law in the motto refers to the law of Moses. However, at a deeper level, he says the law of Moses, and now I have a quote by Paul Foster Case, which was a law of sacrifice, is itself a symbol of those preparatory processes of yoga, in which the seeker for enlightenment loosens the bonds of material form and appearance, represented by Taurus. In other words, it seems like what he's saying is that the law of Moses and yoga are essentially two different ways to give up our attachment to the material world in order to become more connected with our spiritual nature. While Case associates the yoke of Taurus with yoga, I like to associate it with the laws of nature, also known as natural law. I think of the yoke as the rules of the game of life, which we are all harnessed to, and thus which unites us all. When a group of people all meet together to either play or watch a game of baseball, everyone present is united in adherence to a specific set of rules. The batters walk up to the plate one at a time in a specific sequence, only when it is their turn to bat. The coaches provide guidance to the team, but never step up to the plate themselves. The spectators scream and yell from the sidelines, but they never walk out onto the field to catch fly balls for an inning. Everyone in attendance is following certain rules, and anyone who doesn't follow the rules gets ejected from the stadium. Like John Dewey wrote in Experience and Education, rules are a part of the game. They are not outside of it. No rules, then no game. Different rules, then a different game. Manly Hall points out that man makes rules, nature makes laws. We have all sorts of laws of nature that we must obey and play within if we want to grow into the life form that our intuition is urging us to become. I divide these laws into three types of nature: the laws of human nature, the laws of Mother Nature, and the laws of divine nature. My understanding of the laws of human nature is shaped largely by human givens theory. As the biological organism called a human being, we are all born with a set of common needs and resources. For example, all humans have a need for security, a need for autonomy and control, a need for status, for privacy, for attention, and so on. Didn't mention there, but we obviously also have a need to eat, a need to breathe, a need to drink water, a need to stay warm to an extent. So we're born with these needs, these laws that we must obey. We also have resources that we're born with, such as the ability to remember things, to imagine things, to develop rapport with other human beings, and so on. By studying these laws of human nature, we become better able to recognize the unconscious mind at work in ourselves and others around us. Once we gain this insight, we can then work in union with our unconscious mind so that it becomes an ally and an advocate of our growth instead of an antagonist working against us. The next yoke we are harnessed to is the laws of Mother Nature. These are the laws that all of life on planet Earth adhere to. According to Manly Hall, we must learn to live with nature as a friend instead of as something to be dominated. In the lecture linked above, Hall alludes to two laws of nature that we must obey. The first is to, quote, do everything as economically, carefully, and moderately as possible. Energy is the force or fuel that gives life forms, any life forms, the ability to do anything. Thus, Mother Nature recognizes energy as the incredibly precious resource that it is, and she always rewards life forms that conserve energy and punishes life forms that waste energy. In the name of this conservation of energy, Hall said we must maintain the balance of nature by preventing excess, whether this is excessive poverty or excessive wealth. The second law of nature that Hall mentions is that nature rewards that which is constructive, collaborative, and virtuous, and punishes that which is destructive, selfish, and indifferent. He said, nature does not destroy anything for the pleasure of destroying it. Again, I think this is because it's more energy efficient for us to work together than it is to fight each other. The final yoke, alluded to by Manly Hall, is the idea of divine law. He did not elaborate on this in the lecture above, but I think divine law can be boiled down to two ideas. The first is that, at your core, you are a free, eternal spirit of consciousness. You are not a human being, but an ancient, vast, and eternal spiritual being having a human experience. It may feel like you are trapped within all of the laws and rules of life and society, but at your deepest core, you are God, just like everyone and everything else you interact with is also God. The second divine law of nature is that, just like the God in the Bible, you have a creative power that is fundamental to and irrevocable from your essence. In the Bible, it is said that humans are made in the image of God. It follows then that if God was able to create the world and life, then us humans also have the ability to create new worlds and new life. I'm reminded of something Alan Watts said. And he said, you are not something that is the result of the Big Bang on the end of the process. You are still the process. You are the Big Bang, the original force of the universe, coming on as whoever you are. In other words, the creative force of the Big Bang is not over, but echoing through you. You are an agent of the Big Bang, continuing to cause change in the world. To wrap this up, the takeaway here is that if we expect to grow into what we were meant to be, what Ivan Terrell calls our genetic potential, we must study and obey the laws of human nature, the laws of Mother Nature, and the laws of our divine nature. Just as an acorn requires a specific balance of soil, water, air, and sunlight in order to grow into the oak tree it is meant to become, or it is trying to become, we too must obey natural law in order to grow into the cosmic being we are meant to become, and we are trying to become. This leads us to our tarot card interpretations. Keeping in mind these traditional and new ideas, here's some of my personal interpretations of each of the Taurus tarot cards. The Hierophant, Major Arcana number 5. In the Hermetic Kabbalah, the Hierophant sits on the path between the second Sephirah Chokmah and the fourth Sephirah Chesed. According to Dion Fortune, Chokmah is the radical force of change emanating from God, while Chesed represents the principle of organization and construction. In other words, the Hierophant is where the will of the higher power becomes the organizing principle in your life. It is said that living a good life requires the wisdom of knowing what to do and the courage to actually do it. This card specifically represents the wisdom that comes from listening to your inner teacher. In his book, The True and Invisible Rosicrucian Order, Paul Foster Case says that all human beings have an inner teacher who can guide them through life. The Hierophant is this inner teacher. The idea of the inner teacher is similar to what in our modern times we would call our intuition. Intuition is defined by Merriam-Webster as, quote, the power or faculty of attaining to direct knowledge or cognition without evident rational thought and inference. In other words, when your intuition tells you to do something, you feel it as a kind of hunch more than like you attained it through intellectual analysis. However, what's fascinating is that your intuition can be grown. Every time you ignore your intuition, you are conditioning it to stay silent, stay quiet. However, every time you make space for the silence that is required to listen to your intuition, and every time you actually do what your intuition is telling you to do, your intuition grows a little bit. If you do this long enough, you can eventually get to a point where you become a faithful, obedient disciple of your intuition. At this point, you no longer go through life on your own, for you have become a follower of the secret hidden teacher that only you can follow. According to Paul Foster Case, the Hierophant card represents that stage of the journey where you begin to actually hear the voice of your intuition, which he calls interior hearing. If you stick with this long enough, you eventually develop interior vision, where you can begin to see your inner teacher. Since the Hierophant is the intuition, and Taurus is associated with physical manifestation and perseverance, I would say that this card can be interpreted as having the fixed determination to see the recommendations of your intuition through to completion. It can be about acting in the outer physical world in accordance to your inner spiritual world. It can also be about creating physical works or behaving in a way which helps others connect to their own inner teacher, which should probably be one of the end goals of all priests and holy people. Lastly, the Hierophant card can represent taking that desire to acquire more and more things and shifting it inward, transforming it into a desire to acquire more and more intuition. The next card is the King of Discs, also known as the Prince of Discs, also known as the King of Pentacles. The King of Discs represents airy earth, which can be interpreted as earth shaped by mind, amongst many other things. Joe Monteleone, the awesome teacher over at the Tarot Mysticism Academy, whose level 2 class inspired me to start this blog in the first place, associates the King cards with interactions between you and groups of people, whereas the Queen cards are more about interpersonal, one-on-one interactions between you and someone else. So the King cards are you and groups of humans. The Queen cards are you and one other human. Thus, this card, King of Discs, can represent using conscious thinking, planning, and communication to interact with and influence the external physical world. To me, the King of Discs can represent anyone who communicates with a mass audience through a form manifested in the physical world, whether that form is a book, a video, a website, a painting, etc. What's important here is that the work is not shared with just one person, but with groups of people or a group of people. For example, instead of making a painting and giving it to a friend, this card is more about asking a local coffee shop or a business if you can present your work there. This card is more about finding some way to share this work of art so that it is accessible to more than just one person. Since Taurus represents not only physical manifestation, but also the yoke of the law of our three natures, this work would ideally be intended to help your audience understand and connect with our human nature, our mother nature, and or our divine nature. I also see this card as someone who takes responsibility to act in the world as a patient parent, tending to the physical and emotional needs of others in their tribe. In terms of physical needs, maybe the King of Discs would help people in his tribe exercise their bodies by organizing a group hike or a basketball game or a group trip to a yoga class or a group outing to play some laser tag, anything that'll get their bodies moving. While these activities would get the body some exercise, they would likely also help people satiate their emotional needs to an extent. According to the human givens theory, humans have very specific emotional needs, which are as follows: the need to feel safe and secure, the need to have a sense of autonomy and control, the need for status in the community, the need for privacy so we may reflect and consolidate experience, the need to give and receive attention, the need for connection with others, friendship, love, intimacy, and community, the need to learn, which results in more competence and achievement, and the need for meaning, which comes from pursuing a personally engaging challenge. As the responsible, thoughtful, and mindful parent, the King of Discs interacts with the entire tribe of humanity in a way that acknowledges their needs and satiates them if he can. In order to learn more about how you can communicate and interact with others in a way that caters both to your needs and the needs of others, I recommend looking into Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication, Mark Terrell's YouTube channels called Uncommon Practitioners and Uncommon Knowledge, and Dr. Paul Jenkins' YouTube channel. Five of Discs. The Five of Discs is composed of 4 building blocks. Discs as Earth, representing the physical world and manifestation. 5 as Geberah, or Mars, representing courage and willpower. Mercury, representing thinking and communication. And Taurus, representing physical manifestation and the desire to acquire. In this card, we have the tag team of Mars's courage and Mercury's communication to balance out our Taurian desires for the earthly physical world around us. Do you have something you've been wanting to do? This card can represent writing out what you want to do and writing up your plan for how you're going to do it. Unsure what your plan should be? I'd recommend watching this video by Mark Terrell called How to Turn Vague Therapy Goals into Actionable Steps. About 5 minutes in, he talks about this really cool idea where you write an instruction manual for life. The idea is to take yourself out of the equation and instead write an instruction manual filled with practical advice for other people who want to do a similar goal as you. You make sure to write practical and actionable advice, not theoretical and abstract advice. When you're done writing this instruction manual for someone else, you will have an exact game plan for yourself to follow. By taking our vague thoughts and desires and concretizing them into a physical piece of writing, we change it from something happening inside our mind to something that exists outside of us in our environment. and it is much easier to follow a rule if it exists outside of our head and externally in the world. Another interpretation of this card is that since Mars represents conflict, you may experience conflict with other people when you try to express or communicate your vision of what you want to manifest. Other people may not understand your goal, or they may not believe your goal is important enough to pursue, or they may not believe you are able to do it. Luckily, the Mars and the Taurus in this card will give you the strength of the charging bull to persevere through this discouragement. If you share your goal with others, hoping that they will flatter you and encourage you, then you might be giving your external environment too much control over your internal vision. Instead, listen to your intuition. What does it want you to pursue? Because at the end of the day, your soul's intuition is the opinion that matters most. Six of Discs. The Six of Discs is composed of 4 building blocks. Discs as Earth, representing the physical world and manifestation. 6 as Tifereth, the Sun, representing higher consciousness and awareness. The Moon, representing the imagination and the autonomous bodily systems. And Taurus, representing physical manifestation and the desire to acquire. In this card, we have a unique and rare combination of the Sun, the Moon, and the Earth. While Dion Fortune associates the Sun with the soul and higher self, I'm beginning to associate it more and more with what is called in psychology the observing self. As Nesh Nikolic writes on his website, the observing self is that part of us that is able to watch, observe, and witness the physical self and the thinking self. I would also add in there the emotional self and the imagining self. I would divide those up as different from the physical self and the thinking self. In other words, we are not our thoughts or emotions. Instead, we are the consciousness witnessing and experiencing those thoughts and emotions. When we truly internalize this idea and gain the ability to tune into the anchor of our observing self at will, we unlock a secret power. The power to control our thoughts and emotions instead of being controlled by them. The first step to getting out of a bad headspace or a bad emotional state is to identify with the observing self experiencing those thoughts and feelings, because it is only from that level of awareness that we can even begin to start changing things. For example, instead of saying, "Ugh, I'm such an idiot," speak from the perspective of your observing self and say, "Oh, my thinking self is calling me an idiot again." Making this simple change takes an extraordinary amount of power away from your thinking self, which is great because the thinking self has this tendency to be like a gossipy and mean friend who is constantly judging and crapping on people, especially you. Would you want your most gossipy and judgmental friend to be the leader of your business or your family or your country? Or would you prefer it to be someone who is calm, attentive, and receptive? In this card, the Six of Discs, the Sun represents giving the power of rulership back to our observing self, where it belongs. The second important aspect of this card comes from the tension between the imaginary realm of the Moon and the physical realm of the Earth. This tension is well summarized by Seneca's quote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Far too often, we are not seeing things as they actually are, but how we imagine them to be. In his video on the history of psychotherapy, Mark Terrell says, anxiety, anger, depression, and many other psychological conditions are as much disorders of the imaginative mind as of the cognitive or thinking mind, such as with jealousy, when a jealous person imagines things. In fact, in this video, Terrell goes on to posit the idea that all worrying is the result of the use or misuse of the imagination and our creativity. Dr. Paul Jenkins echoes this idea in his videos when he says, "Your brain is constantly predicting what's coming, and you suck at that." In other words, anytime you are scared that something might happen, you are living in your imagination, not reality. Now, this isn't to say that your fear is totally unwarranted and there's not any real danger in your future. Instead, this is a call to action to do a better job of consciously distinguishing between what is an observable, undeniable fact in physical reality right now and what is an imaginary extrapolation or evaluation in your head. Because it is often these extrapolations and evaluations that we incessantly ruminate upon, causing a tremendous amount of unnecessary suffering to ourselves and others. Thus, the big takeaway from this card is to use the higher awareness of the observing self to consciously distinguish between physical reality and imaginary reality. This brings us to the last card, the Seven of Discs. The Seven of Discs is composed of 4 building blocks. Discs as Earth, representing the physical world and manifestation. 7 as Netzach, or Venus, representing emotional needs and beauty. Saturn, representing form and restrictive discipline. And Taurus, representing physical manifestation and the desire to acquire. In this card, the slow and static symbols of earthly discs, earthly Taurus, and restrictive Saturn are contrasted by the active emotional force of Venus. For the most part, our emotions exist to encourage motions or actions. The perfect example of this is our fight or flight impulse. However, in this card, the motion of Venus is stunted by the discipline, obstacles, and restriction of Saturn. Dion Fortune said that while Mars represents destruction through action, Saturn represents destruction through passivity. For example, if someone is giving you trouble, Mars will attempt to stop the trouble by confronting them and fighting them, an active strategy. Saturn, on the other hand, will simply cut the person out of their life, a passive strategy. Both ways resolve the trouble. A more brutal example is, whereas Mars would defeat their enemy by taking an army to battle against them, Saturn would defeat their enemy by starving them, cutting them off from all resources, blocking their trade, destroying their crops, and so on. In the Seven of Discs, Saturn is essentially starving out our emotional needs by presenting us with challenges in the physical world that prevent us from fulfilling these needs. Thus, this card can represent all of the feelings that result from not being able to act out your desires. In this card, it is a really good time to reflect on 2 questions. The first question is, what needs of mine are currently not being met? When we experience frustration, sadness, anger, and so on, our body is signaling to us that one of our emotional needs is currently not being met. With this card, we must really reflect on what we are feeling and what starved emotional need is causing this feeling. Once we are clear, or at least we have a good guess, about what emotional need is being starved, then we can ask ourselves the second question, which is, what things can I cut out of my life in order to better meet this need. Instead of working against the restrictive force of Saturn, try working with Saturn to eliminate things from your life that are preventing you from addressing this need. Perhaps now is not the time to add more things to your life, but to remove some things already in your life. I'm reminded of the quote by, and I'm going to butcher this name, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, when he says, "Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away." One final note is that in this card, I also see a lot of potential for what I'll call a comfort trap. Venus's emotional instincts and Taurus's desire to acquire can both tend to veer you toward what is instantly gratifying. And then Saturn's death by passivity can trap you there, stunting your growth. When you pull this card, remember that the goal of life is to grow. And oftentimes, most times, growth is uncomfortable. This is because as our uncertainty about a situation increases, typically our discomfort levels also increase. However, all brand new situations will have at least some element of uncertainty to them, so avoiding all uncertainty and all discomfort in our life will inevitably cause our life to stagnate and stop growing. The acorn cannot grow into the oak tree until it first leaves the comfort of its shell. We must remember that discomfort is also a nutrient of the soul, and that above all else, what's most important at the end of the day is that you grew, not that you were comfortable. Conclusion. To summarize, Taurus is about following through with steadfast determination on the journey that was initiated in Aries. On a surface level, Taurus seems to be about the desire to acquire, but at a deeper level, it is really about a duty to beauty. Taurus at its core is about appreciating the beautiful things in the physical world, whether it is created by human nature or Mother Nature. When you grow from a dependent, receptive child Taurus into a responsible, creative adult Taurus, you accept that you must not only appreciate the beautiful things in life, but also create and contribute more beautiful things back into life. Thus, Taurus becomes about materializing things into the physical world, taking the idea that was in your head and concretizing it into a physical form that hopefully somewhat resembles what you were imagining. In order to do this well, the creative Taurus must have the practical recognition that what you create in the physical world will not always meet the level of beauty that it had in your imagination. This is because the imaginary realm is vague and forgiving, while the physical realm is rigid and mandates unwavering obedience to the laws of nature. The Taurian artist must recognize that work finished is better than good work. And the better you get at finishing work, the better you will get at finishing good work. Taurus must switch from a scarcity mindset of, "This specific project is my only shot at creating beauty," to an abundance mindset of, "I can always create more beauty." Once we transmute the desiring power of Venus from a desire to acquire more things to a desire to always obey our intuition, we become yoked in union with the mighty bull of Taurus, whose incomprehensible cosmic power will help us persevere through any obstacle that could ever come into our way. So that's the article. I hope you found that useful. If you did, I would appreciate it if you liked this video so that my content is more likely to get recommended by the YouTube algorithm. And if you're interested in content like this, I'm going to be making a ton of content like this, so go ahead and subscribe to this channel. May you embrace the power of this season of Taurus to finish what you've started.